By 1969, the big race on Mount Panorama had become a war. A battle between Australia's two main Australian car manufacturers, Ford and General Motors Holden.
Cars must be just as sold to the public, hence the spectator interest. Pole position on the starting grid for fastest practice times goes to two Falcons and a Holden.
That year I was the lead driver in the third car, so I had no illusions about my role in the team, and the Gagan brothers were quite capable of getting the victory if it was going to be achievable. But one of the things that we implemented instantly that year was a racing tire. It still had a tread pattern, and this was fine, but my teammates hadn't actually had the luxury of this type of tire on a production touring car before. And not to be unkind, but just facts are facts, they hammered the tires too hard, and both the two team cars in front of me had blowouts with rather dramatic results.
Holden tactics are to push the GTHOs, making their drivers keep foot to floor and brake as much as possible. So with every GTHO, there's a GTS close behind. Down in the pits, too, the Falcons are in trouble. A tyre blowout brings Harry Gaps in for much-needed attention. More trouble. This time it's the leader, Pete Gagan, and he's also had a blowout, but still speeding to the pits. Leo is to take over, but this unscheduled stop could cost the race. It was expected the specially imported tyres would only be changed once, but now there must be another stop. The Ford camp is obviously worried.
The checkered flag fell on Colin Bond's Monaro. Even to this day, there are many who feel that if it wasn't for the tyres, Bathurst 69 would have gone to the GTs.
And Al Turner rightly called me in thinking that I was also in danger, when in fact my tires were in good shape, and if I hadn't have had that premature pit stop, I do believe Alan Hamilton and I could have gone on to get our first victory up there, but I just had to wait a year.
Working alongside Alan Moffat on the HO program was a young engineer called Ian Stockings.
Alan Moffat was very good to work with because as a development and testing driver, he was fantastic. Alan had the ability that he could circulate at constant lap speeds, lap after lap after lap. And we then knew that any change we made to the car, that if it reflected in a lap time, it was the change to the car that actually had made the change in the lap time. There was a couple of occasions when I actually rode with him, which was quite exciting, particularly when we worked out a few problems and then he'd forget that I was in the car with him, and Al Turner would be out on the track waving his arms, wanting to get his engineer out of the car.
8 a.m., October 4th, 1970. Pits crews make final adjustments to the mechanical thoroughbreds entrusted to their care.
In 1970, Alan Moffat raced the GT Phase 2 as a solo driver.
But Barry Seaton teams up with Fred Gibson. It's the first time competitors have the option to drive as a team or on their own. Alan Moffat decides to go it alone in the number 1 Ford works entry.
There was one problem that I hadn't counted on, and this was towards, well, certainly towards about the 5-hour mark. Something started to get rather difficult to hold back, and had a pit stop, and in those days the pit stops were about 3 minutes, and I was determined that I had enough time to get my fly undone, and I didn't care where it was going to go. I just kept my feet up on the pedals so they didn't get wet, and I knew the floorboards would be hot enough to dissipate anything that was going to come out of me. And this was fine until I get a little knock on the window, and it's Adrian Ryan from Channel 7 saying, "Alan, would you have a minute?" And I would still love to see the look on my face that day, where I didn't dare stop what I was doing because that was too important, and I'm carrying on a conversation through the window at the same time. I didn't have time to get re-zipped up, and things were quite drafty on Conrod Straight for 3 or 4 laps until I could get myself back to the manner in which I started the race, shall we say.
For Alan Moffat, 1970 was the year to break the GT's drought.
Speculation about Ford's tactics is rife. There are those who feel Moffat will attempt to break up the field, especially as he's backed up by McPhee and Seaton. But the majority are convinced he'll drive only as fast as the dictates of the race demand. However, the Toranas have proved pacey in practice, so they're certain to keep the GTHOs honest. Lapping several of the smaller cars, Moffat artistically conserves the Falcon's power. Winning a Bathurst 500 ranks high among Moffat's ambitions, and he has a chance of achieving this today. But there's still a long way to go. Even at such an early stage, it seems only bad luck could rob him of victory, especially as it's now obvious McPhee is splendidly playing the role of backup driver. Blowing a tyre at Forest Elbow, the Knight Ritter car is badly buckled. Moffat is right on schedule for his final pit stop, during which the crew makes their fastest turnaround. They've taken no longer than 2 minutes 45 on any stop, but this one, with fuel and 4 tyres, is only 2 minutes 9 seconds. He leads McPhee and goes on to win from his teammate, with Don Holland third, a lap behind.
Revenging the humiliation of 69, the GTs blitzed Mount Panorama. Moffat took home the spoils of the Bathurst win and proved himself to be a racing champion.
Very proud.
Coming up, the GTs power on despite the odds.
A spraying cardboard carton attaches itself firmly to Moffat's radiator.
And we track down the rarest GT of them all. The next GT, the XY, sported a protruding air intake that shook with the engine. It was called, quite rightly, the Shaker. GTHO.
The Shaker was perhaps the most potent symbol that's ever been on an Australian car. Like, it moved when the engine moved, when that fantastic 351 engine moved, and this is part of the reason why the Phase 3 GTHO is the most celebrated one of all, because that's the one that really made the name of the Falcon at Bathurst.
Its U-level power, Moffat accelerates the GTHO to something around 140 miles per hour down Conrod.
Working on the Phase 3 was Ford Racing team manager Howard Marsden.
There were always 2 vehicles. People talk Falcon GT, but of course what they really remember is the Falcon GTHO. In other words, the thoroughbred product, the one with all the noise and all came into being because of competitiveness, of course, between the manufacturers, particularly between General Motors and Ford. And General Motors were running hard with the Monaro vehicle. Ford were challenging that, and General Motors decided to slip the yoke of the big V8 because they felt that nobody could sort out, again, the brakes and chassis of such a big car. And they went down to the smaller Torana-based 6-cylinder vehicle. So that left the large Falcon with supposedly an advantage, but only an advantage that could be taken out with a fair amount of work. For Phase 1, we were running around about 250 plus horsepower in those days, and it went up, and the race cars, I think, by the time we'd finished with the Phase 3s, we were somewhere above 340 horsepower out of those vehicles.